Everybody. Today I wanted to make a video about traveling to Canada if you are a permanent resident but your PR card is expired. I get this question very often for different types of cases. So, for example, if you're a permanent resident of Canada and you have to urgently travel, let's say to Europe, but your PR card is expired, what do? There's some people that they don't realize that they really need the valid PR card in order to return, so they end up traveling outside. And when they try to return to Canada, let's say they're from a country that is visa exempt, they might be able to come back and get on the plane. But if you are from a country that needs a visa, you could get into a lot of complicated situations, such as not being able to get on the flight, or getting delayed at the airport, or being able to come back to Canada but then being questioned at the airport and maybe being issued some documents or warnings that you wouldn't want to have, which would cause red flags to your immigration history. So if you are a permanent resident of Canada, it is very important to always, in all cases in general, to have a valid PR card. That means that every 5 years, if you're not a citizen, you should renew your PR card if, of course, you meet the residency requirement. If you have to travel, in order to come back to Canada, you need to have a valid PR card. That demonstrates that you are a permanent resident of Canada. So the PR card is really, the PR card doesn't give you permanent resident status. It's your confirmation of permanent residence that gives you permanent resident status, and the fact that that status hasn't been removed by a negative decision by an officer or a tribunal in Canada. But the PR card is essentially for traveling back to Canada. So if you have to travel urgently and you don't have your PR card, it's expired, or you renewed it and you're waiting, what you're going to have to do is apply for what's called a travel document at the embassy outside of Canada. This is a document that's issued to permanent residents who have an expired PR card, have lost their PR card, or are waiting for a decision on their PR card. It's an application with forms and supporting documents, and it could get complicated because it isn't a document issued on an emergency basis, but sometimes it could take a couple of weeks or sometimes even months to get that document. So if you're going, let's say, to Europe for 10 days and you get there and you're going to apply for a travel document, it could be that if you explain it properly and you put urgent, I need to come back to Canada, I need to go back to my job, and I was only here urgently, the embassy could issue that travel document to you in a few days. But if the embassy, depending on the country that you're applying to, there's a lot of backlogs and delays, then it could take a couple of weeks for them to review and issue you the travel document, and that could be problematic because then you're stuck outside. So my recommendation is always to renew. If you renewed your card and now you're traveling, it's going to be important for you to have evidence that your PR card is in the process of getting renewed. So a copy of your the fee that you've paid, or the documents that you submitted, or the tracking number of the courier package that you submitted. That way, if you do have to apply for a travel document, then you can show that, you can put a copy of that evidence in the application to show, look, I've actually taken care of my immigration matters. I've renewed I'm in the process of renewing my PR card. Now, if you are traveling to the United States, you can travel back to Canada without your PR card if you're coming by car or by bus. The PR card is really necessary when you're flying by plane, but when you're coming by land from the United States, if you're coming in a vehicle, you are allowed to cross with your landing. Ideally, you should have your PR card because it makes everything simpler. But if you absolutely do not have it, then if you have your confirmation of permanent residence, which is the document you were issued when you became a permanent resident. Back in the day, it was called a landing document. Now it's called a confirmation of permanent residence. If you have that document and you're by car, then you can show that to the officer. Also, always recommended to have evidence that you have renewed your PR card. With that, the officer should be able to let you in. Now, they could ask you some questions just to make sure that you still meet the residency requirement, which is currently 2 years out of 5, so you could be questioned. So it's also important to have perhaps an Excel sheet with all your travel dates or evidence that you've been living in Canada. So that is a possibility if you're coming by land. So my recommendation is, if you're traveling, always make sure you review immigration rules and regulations about traveling with or without a PR card, what the timelines are if you have to urgently apply for a travel document. If you've applied for the renewal of your card, make sure you have evidence of that on you, because it's going to make your travels much easier, especially if you don't have your PR card and you come back. The officer could interpret that as, oh, you're coming as a visitor, you're not coming as a permanent resident, especially if you've traveled a lot and you don't have evidence that you have lived in Canada. Then they could issue you a removal order, which you're going to have to file an appeal, and it could take a year or two to go to court, and it could be seen as not caring so much about your permanent resident status, not updating your documents, and just saying, oh, well, you don't seem to be a permanent resident, so we're going to indicate that you're a visitor, and oh, do you want to renounce to your permanent resident status? A lot of issues like this can happen at the border, and it could be avoided if you're well prepared. Thank you for listening.